Welcome to the Web Platform Podcast. This is episode number 66, Custom Elements and Skate.js. So today on our panel we have Danny Blue.
Hey everybody.
Justin Ribeiro.
Hello, wonderful people.
And myself, Eric Isaacson. And our guests today are Trey Shugart and Jonathon. I'm going to butcher your name, so please help me here.
Creenaune.
Okay. Yahoo!
Hi.
So can you guys introduce yourselves? Tell us a little bit about yourselves, what you guys are doing, and what Skate.js is.
Well, I'm Trey. I'm the author originally, and I work on a team called OWI, or Design Platform, here at Atlassian, and we run a library for components, and we are making the move to web components, and we had the need for a small custom element library to build our web components with.
I'm Jonathon. I'm a dev manager at Atlassian, working with Trey, and Trey's on my team, and we work on the design guidelines, and as Trey said, the UI library that implements those guidelines.
Cool.
So when you say custom elements, can we go a little bit through that? Like, what does that mean to you guys?
Custom elements to me means a strict API boundary, or a clear API boundary between what the user can actually do with the component and what is actually internal private API. It also means it has a semantic meaning to the element itself and the behavior that it gives you.
Yeah, I mean, Trey's definitely, wearing his architectural hat here. I think most people kind of say, oh yeah, we're using like web components, so are we, but we're just using custom elements because they're the only thing that we're kind of, they fulfill, like custom elements fulfills the needs that we have, and it's also the thing that's most, stable in the spec and we can depend on not changing.
Yeah, I think I saw that in one of your slides, Jonathon, for your deck in June. For Skate. Yeah. I think you said that I had said before as well. So I mean,
yeah.
When you think of web components, there's four pieces, right? There's the templates, there's the shadow DOM, the imports, and of course the custom elements. And I think most people really relate to the custom elements because it's most like kind of what we're used to with UI, where we wanted to have, right?
And it's the most important piece, but that's not opinion at all.
No, not at all. So you have these life cycle events, right? And what else? It gives you like whenever an attribute on the element changes, it gets modified. And if you've ever done that in jQuery back in 2008 or 2009, you know how painful that is. Yeah. So it's nice to have that kind of taken care of for you. The created and attached and detached, as well as for the custom elements. So it's a spec from the W3C, and we're polyfilling it, and I think you guys use a modified polyfill.
What do you mean by modified polyfill? Like what?
I might be mistaken, but like, is it the same one that we're using in Web Components.js?
No, so it doesn't actually use a custom element polyfill under the hood. It actually just abstracts that internally and says if you're using something that's compatible with spec, we're going to use document.register element if we can. Otherwise, we're going to do probably something similar to what's happening in the custom element polyfill. But we don't want to have any opinions about overriding document.createElement or anything like that. It's partially because we want Skate to be able to have multiple versions on the page. So it's not actually polyfilling that per se.
Which is a really unique and versatile approach, I think. I don't think I've seen that in web components yet.
Yeah, I think it's partially because a polyfill kind of takes over. But we saw that we were able to actually create custom elements without overriding everything. So, and we do have a need for having multiple skates on the page here. And since it's very small, there's very little overhead when including multiple ones on the page, and it actually will do a lot of work underneath the hood to make sure that performance overhead is mitigated. for example, like if you had multiple versions of multiple mutation observers on the document, your performance will possibly happen.
So okay, so Skate.js is it's a web component library, I guess is the easiest way to describe it. But what exactly is it for? So like is it like a collection of elements for stuff and like here's some stuff for you to use? Does it go as far as something? It doesn't sound like it's something that goes as far as like a Polymer, which does, polyfills absolutely everything and seems to be a much, maybe leaning more towards a framework type thing. So where does Skate fit into the landscape of web component frameworks that are out there?
As you're probably aware, it's a superset of the custom element spec, and we wanted to stay close to it because that means that we can use native means to find behavior. But using the custom element API as it stands is kind of cumbersome because there's just a lot of boilerplate that goes into it. So if you're writing a lot of components, you're going to be writing the same thing, and end up having to write your own abstraction, whereas Skate kind of takes a lot of that, negates you having to do that, and then add some features on top. Like I'll be talking mostly in terms of what's on master right now and about to be released in the next week or so. And it allows you to define properties, linkages between those properties to attributes. It allows you to define Boolean properties, how properties will serialize to an attribute from an attribute if it's linked up. It defines a hook where you can render something but doesn't have any opinions about really how you do that. But it just gives you a place in the life cycle to where you can be sure that like your properties are set up, and then after that happens, your element is ready for it to be manipulated or whatever.
So this actually, especially the first part of what you said, it sounds very much like the jQuery kind of custom elements and web components. That so like that, just hearing you describe it, that's kind of what it sounds like. This idea, especially when jQuery like really first started out, that it's abstracting a lot of this stuff away. I mean, there's nothing in jQuery that you can't do by yourself, but you would do it, and then you would write your own set of utility methods to handle these different things. And that sounds like that's what Skate is trying to do, and then of course give you those extra things.
Yeah, I think when we wrote Skate, or when Trey wrote Skate to be precise, it was like there were two things. We saw that custom elements like solved a lot of problems that we had, and really with the future, and we were like, we want to use this now. And we also want a bit of syntactic sugar around creating custom elements because it's not, super particularly nice.
Yeah, I think the biggest thing for me was trying to do one thing and doing it well rather than trying to do all the things. And the part around templating was more like, that's it. A lot of people have a lot of opinions about what they want to use for templating, so I wanted Skate to be approachable for those people who may have different opinions on that. You narrow your user base once you start making heavy-handed opinions like that.
I think that's so. So that makes sense from making a decision up, spread it out to the biggest user base possible. That totally makes sense. How do you make sure? Is it more work to make sure that you interact with all of those things, or did it actually become easier leaving that up to the end user?
It's less for us to maintain, for one, but the templating aspect of it is just a function, right? You decide how you render it to your host element. So you can use things like, I used JSX with it last night, using JSX DOM. You can use handlebars, shadow DOM, virtual DOM. You can slam in HTML if you want. You can do DOM diffing. And I've used many of those ways of templating, and it's actually not very difficult because all you're given is an element, and you do whatever you need to with it.
Awesome.
So I mean, Polymer, when you look at it, it's fairly large by comparison. I don't know how big Skate is when it's
5 kilobytes gzipped.
About 5K.
Yeah, so that's a little bit smaller than Polymer. But there is quite a lot in there, right? There's a serialization, like you talked about with custom modes. They do a lot on top of that. and there's a lot of work, and they have like lots of people on the team and money from Google to do this, so we're kind of lucky they do that. But it's all or nothing, right? Because you get Polymer, and then you get Web Components JS, and so you have all this stuff. But taking the approach of we're just taking this one part, and we're going to work with it, and we're going to see how far we can take it, is really, really interesting to me. Like, I wonder if you'll have a Shadow DOM, like a Shadow DOM library at one point, or a template library as you need these things, or if you need them.
So I think they kind of have different motivations. So Polymer is there because I want to use web components, but also I want to explore the spec and the things that we've decided around Shadow DOM, how do they actually work in practice? Skate's personality is more like, I just want to use the things that I can really depend on out of the web component spec today, right now, which is custom elements. And so, if you go to I don't know, Bitbucket or something, that's got, Skate-driven custom elements on the page because we wanted to use that now.
So what is Atlassian's interest in web components then?
So, I mean, from my perspective, when we decided to use web components, our team does the kind of cross-products. So we've got designers in our team who work on the style guide and the design guidelines, and front-end developers working on the UI components that implement them, right? The typer heads and drop-downs and dialogues and those kind of things. So it occupies similar space to Bootstrap. We have a couple of issues. So definitely the culture is, both internally and through acquisitions or whatever, we have a lot of different stacks. So different teams are using Backbone, people are using Angular, people are using React. On the server side, people are using Java or PHP or Python in different applications, and we're delivering, the same library to all of these people. Web components, and so when you get to that level among different front-end frameworks and different server-side frameworks, the DOM is the only consistent layer, right? It's the only common denominator across all of them. So if we want to give them templating, for example, the DOM is the best place to put the templating, and that's what custom elements gives us. So if you want to write a dialogue, well, you go AUI-dialogue instead of having some JavaScript that enhances it and plonks it into the DOM, and yeah.
And I think that is a perfect use case, and I think it's a perfect example of what web components are good for, and actually a reason that I think a lot of large companies should look into them, because of just what you said. Eric and I work for Deloitte. Deloitte's a very large company with lots of internal applications, and I'm sure that different parts are built on different stacks, and there's a tendency in the enterprise world, I feel, when looking at software solutions, to want to pick up a big all or nothing solution. I mean, that's when you run into things like your Salesforces and all these different things. But more and more, that's not the way that stuff works. It's like you said, you acquire a company that works on a certain tech stack, and then it's like, okay, well, do we rewrite everything so that everything's consistent across the board? So having this kind of core, at least from the UI side, having this core that is consistent and is easy to make consistent, and then everybody, you can drop it in here in your Angular app, you can drop it in here in your React app. And anybody listening to this podcast has heard me say almost this exact same thing before, so I'm gonna stop now. But I'm very happy to hear you say it, and that's a very concrete example of why it works and why it's so cool.
Yeah, I've heard lots of complaints with older Angular and React, and at work, like you said, we have struggles, because clients fear change. So if they're used to having, their JSPs render all of their HTML, old school, not really heavy client, modern application, and you tell them, hey, we're going to build you this awesome Angular app, and it's going to be all front end. Everything's going to be awesome. You just have to do a little API for us, and we'll just grab that. They kind of fear that, and that's kind of scary that they do. So enterprise is a total crazy beast to deal with on that level.
They still make heavy use of jQuery, which is only on the client. But I think web components will be kind of an answer to that because it's going to be natively built into the DOM. They'll have more of a better adoption rate because of that.
And that brings up a great point too. Like, what happens when custom elements are in all the browsers, right? That we support. Then what happens to Skate? Do you still have that abstraction on top, that superset?
Totally. You just remove some code so it gets smaller. We actually
smaller than 5K.
Well, we did decouple the mutation observer out of it, so you can use any mutation observer you want in master in 0.14, which is coming up. But there is still some work to abstract around like the whole document.register element thing and to use mutation observers internally. So once it is supported by all the browsers that Skate wants to support, then you can remove a lot of code out of it. And performance will benefit because of that.
I was really happy to see, like, when I looked through the code these past few days, that you're using a lot of ES6 also. So you're using modules, you have module loaders in there, some classes, and what advantages did that give you, and what led you to those decisions as well?
So ES6 modules gives you the ability to write and feature standardized syntax and transpile to anything, including globals. So that was really a no-brainer. And Babel is an amazing transpiler. It does everything really well. It's really well tested. So it was just very easy for us to make that decision. Classes, it doesn't actually use in the production source code. It's in the tests, and it's testing the fact that somebody might want to use ES6 class syntax to define a component, and you can subclass a component, and you can extend the return value of the Skate function, which is a function and component definition. You can extend that and use that.
Well, I noticed that if you look at the notes for the web apps group, right, when they talked about custom elements back in, like, I think between the notes were from January to March, they talked about some common things that they agreed on. The browser vendors. This is the face-to-face talks that we've talked about on this podcast before with the browser vendors. And one of the things they discussed was that they want to use pieces of ES6, and the class syntax was one thing that they had said that they wanted to incorporate. Everybody wanted to incorporate that. But there is some disagreement in the web components world whether people want to use that or should. Have you guys seen that, or did that kind of lean to it because the standard may lean that way?
I haven't seen the discussions around that, but I've briefly seen some stuff in the spec about it. But I didn't dive too deep into looking at it. Hopefully it's not going to be something that's required to use the API.
And also, the other thing that was interesting was, right now, with custom elements, one of the drawbacks is you can't upgrade. You can't change the element once it's done, right? So, if that's changed, do you think you'll have additional things to add as well to Skate?
Yeah. Off the top of my head, I can't really comment on the internals, I guess, but it's not something that's impossible. I don't think it would be that much work to do. But I do have kind of an opinion on that. That I don't know. Would you really want to change the semantic meaning of an element? It's at that point it's like a new element. So I'm not sure that's. I'm not sure about that.
I think I tend to agree with you where it's almost like when you have it when you're in just general, if you're programming something in Java or anything where you create new instances of something, so anything, you will change things about it maybe, so if it's a custom element, you might change properties or something like that, but I would find it unlikely that you would dynamically change what the thing is rather.
Yeah. Well, you can do that with like input elements, so you can change the type of it and it'll change. Maybe that's something that a custom element would support, is that if you change an attribute, it would kind of change how this element behaves, maybe template it out.
Yeah.
Could you dynamically create one too? Like after the page is loaded, could you then say, create this element?
Yep.
Yeah.
Okay.
I
wasn't sure if that worked. I haven't tried that out yet.
So the document.create element works. It just doesn't override document.create element. So in polyfill land, it would asynchronously upgrade that element when it's added to the DOM. But Skate does have an API called Skate.create that will synchronously initialize an element for you and return it to you. And you can pass properties to it.
And so then you could just take that and then drop it into your DOM.
Yeah, and Skate also returns you a constructor, which can be called like a function. So if you like calling functions instead of using constructors, you can do both. But the Skate.create way of creating something was also created to hide the implementation detail of the is attribute, because with document.create element, you create the element, then you pass it 2 arguments, and depending on how you've defined that component, you then have to pass arguments in like different ways, and it's just kind of really weird where you can actually infer that information from the component definition itself. So all you do is pass a single argument to Skate.create. It just figures everything out. And that has the added benefit of the contention of the is attribute. If that is thrown out or whatever, that we don't have to change our API.
Which I hope so, because seems the wrong way around.
Yeah, it's helpful, but it is kind of...
I think that kind of touches on one other thing, which is something we're really interested in from Web Components land, which is how we make accessibility work properly. So, for example, I've got a custom element like an input, for example, or like a type ahead field, and I want someone, when they click a label, well, that label's going to be for this input, but it's hard to make that, when I click the label, it actually puts the mouse cursor inside my custom element, or inside the element that I've rendered, which might be, a couple of DOM elements down or in the shadow DOM or something like that. So that's something we're like super interested. We've got our own kind of, like in our UI library, we've got some solutions for that at the moment. I think the other thing though is like the amount to which Skate has really helped us with accessibility. So for instance, with like to get even like a, drop down and a button working that shows a drop down. So we kind of have like a matrix of, screen reader, OS, browser combinations that we test in for accessibility. And to get that right, you've got to have like a couple of ARIA attributes on the button and like 5 ARIA attributes on the drop down. Enabling ourselves to encapsulate that inside a web component so that like a developer in product land just needs to go, all right, this is a button and it's for this drop-down. Then when we expand the web component or the custom element, we can add all the ARIA attributes that we want to. That's like a massive win for us. I don't go and have to teach like, a couple of hundred developers how to do ARIA properly.
Which is its own can of worms. Because I mean, we've spoken quite a few times about accessibility on this podcast before.
Yeah,
and it is a huge thing to. It's tough when you have to think about it. So it's great if you guys can create something, and then maybe I don't have to think about it. It just happens.
Yeah. Oh, and it's not even that you don't have to think about it. It's like it could change. So in our relationship between the button and the drop down that it displays, I think. I'm trying to remember which order it was, but we had it as like ARIA owns, and then I think when people started upgrading to Mavericks, it didn't work with like Chrome and VoiceOver, and so we had to change that to ARIA controls. And again, that's something like, I don't want to go and have to tell like people to like find and replace like ARIA owns in this situation with ARIA controls. If we can encapsulate that inside our own component, that's like the best thing ever for us.
It is like,
and that's an instance where I say like, custom elements are like the separation of interface and implementation in the DOM. Like for us, the ARIA stuff is part of the implementation of our component. It's not something that we need to have on the interface.
No, and it's like you said with the is attribute. If is changes, the public-facing API that the developers interact with doesn't change, and it's the same thing you were just saying with ARIA, which I guess is why you started talking about it. But hiding those things away is important, because it also makes it much easier. Just if you're building components and distributing them, it makes it much easier to keep semantic versioning, because if an API that you're using changes, you don't have to bump up an entire point release. if you're doing it right. But you can say like, okay, we fixed it. It works with the latest things now. You don't have to worry about it. Just download the latest copy.
Yeah.
So when you say you're wrapping it up though with all the ARIA stuff inside, how is that working? Because you're not using Shadow DOM now. What are you doing to get that in encapsulation?
Mostly documentation. I think exposing a subset of attributes and the element name is what you can create gets us 90% of the way there. But there's nothing stopping somebody from going into your Shadow DOM and changing something. But it's about communication and documenting that, people being good citizens with things.
So we're on a podcast, and you didn't see Trey do like inverted comma ears when he was like saying Shadow DOM, but we're actually not using Shadow DOM at the moment. So we're rendering stuff into the visible DOM. So when we expand like a drop-down menu, for example, we're just expanding. We're adding divs and LIs and ULs under the custom element.
Right. Okay. And as far as like, I found that the bigger advantage of Shadow DOM in general is that it's not the encapsulation part; it's the composition. Like just having that available to nest everything inside of it, and being able to take these little pieces and put them inside of these other pieces, and making small components that can fit inside of these things, and you can put them together like Legos, like we're supposed to, right?
Yep. And I think the changes they made recently to the name slots from the old like content select API was really good, because it's kind of hiding that implementation detail where if somebody created a content node and said, I'm only selecting an element that matches this selector, then whoever is putting that light DOM in there must know that what it's selecting, or that it's only going to select an element, and maybe not an extension of that element if it has a different tag name, which really limits what you can do with it. But it still doesn't answer things like server-side rendering. How do you do that? There's no clear path to that with Shadow DOM.
That's more of an architectural decision at that point, right? I mean, does Shadow DOM need to work on the server side? I mean, there is some notion that it would be good, but do we have? I mean, everyone's got an opinion as to that. But I mean, what's your guys' opinion on Shadow DOM? Does Skate now work with Shadow DOM? Like, can I take Skate from a custom element standpoint and inject into Shadow DOM if Shadow DOM is available?
Yeah. You mean putting a custom element inside a Shadow DOM, or just using Shadow DOM with it?
Just using Shadow DOM.
If I'm in the constructor or the callback, I think this is what you mean, Justin. You can slap me if not. It's basically saying that I can say that this dot shadow equals this dot create shadow root.
Yep.
And then you have a shadow root inside of that element.
And well, that's part of the reason that we want to couple that whole templating aspect of it is that so a lot of people might want to use that massive polyfill, or only use native, or use shady DOM, or use something else. And everybody has a different opinion about that. So just not having an opinion about that part of it, I think is essential.
Yeah, so with Skate's design, because it just requests the user to, or the person implementing the custom element to render it itself, you can choose to put that in the Shadow DOM inside your render callback, or you can choose not to.
All right. Is that kind of what you meant, Justin?
Yeah, no, I mean, it's just that, I like the custom element API as much as the next person, but to me, without Shadow, it seems it's like I don't know how additionally useful custom element it is without Shadow. Like, to me, I think they go hand in hand. I can see, like, I particularly like the superset, primarily because custom is kind of a pain in the neck to deal with. But I think everyone kind of agrees on that straight away. But again, that's just my opinion. Like, from, I was playing with Skate today as we were sort of preparing for the podcast today, and it's quite clever. I do like the way that sort of addresses some of the things, and I like the fact that it has, I can use any template engine I want, which is an important integration story, which I think kind of gets lost in a lot of other web component situations. I mean, we talk about that it is easy to sort of integrate web components with existing platforms because a lot of it is based on the DOM. Like, hey, you can, it has, you're getting the benefits of the DOM with the thing that you create as well, right? But every case is a little different, and the integration story, I think it's a nice touch.
Yeah, so I put out a tweet there saying, like, custom elements and templates is pretty much all you need right now for web components to use. And immediately, Andrew Rhoda and Brian Cardell were like, "What? Are you kidding me?" And so I got on a hangout with them, and I'm sort of leaning that way too, Justin, where like Shadow DOM, the slots, and how you would do that, it is pretty necessary to get the complexities for some of this stuff. But
yeah, I mean,
I completely disagree. So,
so my view on that is that I'm more concerned. So there are three kind of people involved in this. There's the people writing Skate, there's the people authoring a custom element, and there's the people using that custom element. Now we're not using the Shadow DOM yet, and we're allowing our own templating. But because we've got that separates between interface and implementation, the broad people, like the people using the custom element, we can switch that to use the Shadow DOM underneath, or we can change how we're templating it, and they will be unaffected. So it's really about...
It's definitely an easier boundary to break, for sure, especially with corporations. Like, I am sure I could get this on a project at Amtrak, right? Or not Amtrak, I'm sorry, at where do we work, Danny? Deloitte Digital.
But I mean, yeah. And so on that note, we've found a lot of use for custom elements without Shadow DOM. And the idea is that as long as someone's kind of playing by the rules and not like looking too much into what's actually getting rendered underneath the custom element, and just working with that custom element API, we'll move it to Shadow DOM eventually, which will probably be when Shadow DOM's like natively available. The reason we didn't use it was because we had a look at polyfilling it and decided it was too much of a performance issue and complexity issue for people trying to debug it. But at some point I would expect that in our component library, all of the things today which are using Skate and expressed as custom elements, we will move them to the Shadow DOM backwards compatibly.
I think there's another aspect to this too, where in a smaller company or somebody building a website, it might be very easy for them just to pick up the entire polyfill range and just move with it, right? But in a larger company where you have so many different opinions and people doing different things and have different experiences, it's really hard to get buy-in for something like so new like that, and something that is very well known. It's very hard to polyfill and has major performance implications, and we have massive DOMs in our products. So getting that buy-in to use that, if it were bundled with Skate, nobody'd want to really use that, or maybe, I don't know, I mean, but the sense that I get is that people are very wary of doing that.
It's a tough sell. I mean, I think we saw that in, Polymer 0.5 rather, where, there was a massive sort of amount of work that went into the Shadow DOM polyfill. Now, that was Herculean work, like realistically, to do that Shadow DOM polyfill, and everyone knew it. I think that was, it was a known issue going in that it was probably going to have to be done. Like, hey, we can do it if you need it. And then obviously it happened, and then everyone's like, wow, we did it. Doesn't work as fast as we'd like, because it's hard. I mean, at the end of the day, when you have browser engineers writing your polyfills for things, you're talking about just huge tasks of work, and that's tough. And I think that, there's been other sort of attempts to polyfill Shadow. I know that didn't go so hot, or they implemented parts of it to sort of get you certain features out of it. But yeah, I think things like Shady or other approaches of that nature, where you're using Shadow if you've got it. If you don't, we're not going to use it because the perf hit is too harsh. the other polyfills, I don't know, like custom, like you guys said, like why did you guys choose to write like sort of polyfill custom as opposed to like use just the custom elements chunk out of web components? Because you got, we can break it up at this point.
Well, so the first reason was that, when we first did this was like 18 months ago, and it just wasn't there. It wasn't an option. Maybe that's the main reason.
Yeah, I think a lot of it was size too. I mean,
yeah, that was, yeah.
I mean, it seems so small in the grand scheme of things, but back in the day when, like, Polymer was still like 0 releases and weren't stable yet, and Skate was just getting off the ground, and we were trying to make decisions whether or not we want to use it. Size is a big thing for us because we do have a pretty heavy payload coming in our products, and we don't want to add too much to that. And the Skate was actually smaller at that time than the custom element polyfill, but it gave you the same functionality.
It's interesting though, because I've looked through a lot of different libraries. I've done a lot of research with this, and yours is the only one that has lasted that is a vanilla one, where you're using, even though you're using custom elements only, it hasn't been abandoned by the company. And I've seen some that were from corporate companies that have been abandoned. They did them as experiments and just took them off GitHub or whatever. Or even some of them, like I talked about this once before, I think on the last podcast, like I thought Brick was a great library of components that was native, and that was abandoned, and that was Mozilla, right? I haven't seen a commit in like a year. So, I mean, I think it's great that you guys are able to do this to get buy-in, and I think the reason you're doing it is because you're taking that single thing, and you're able to get clients to have buy-in at a little small cost for higher impact.
Well, that's kind of where front end is going now that NPM is focusing more on front end, and we have all these awesome build tools. Is that we can consume small modules now, and it makes sense to build small modules and piece together things rather than having this monolithic thing that if you want to change something, you have to change all the things rather than changing one little tiny piece out of it.
Yeah, because the other way I've seen it is like companies will say, we're only going to use Angular. This is the only thing we're going to use, or we're only going to use React. And then everything is based on that, and then there's no flexibility in that sense. And something like Polymer might take that approach where if you're going to use web components, this is what we're going to use, is Polymer for everything, because it's production ready and it's going to be out there with everything because of the because Google is they have a strong marketing team. They have a strong DevRel team on there and lots of people. So companies see that and they may say, well, we'll put all of this we'll trust in this because Google trusts in this. But on the flip side of that, though, I've seen articles on design groups and developer groups that are still saying stuff about Polymer, like this is still an experiment and it's not ready. And so even with that powerhouse of marketing, they're still struggling. So how has this been affecting you guys?
So I think for us, we work on applications, some of which are pretty new, some with Jira's like 12 years old, man. Jira is never going to move, like as an Atlassian, right? We're never going to say, all right, from now on, every product is moving to React and all the old code's moving and all new code is going to be written like that. First, it's just not the culture of our company. Second, an acquisition will come along and it's like, do the first thing you do when you acquire companies, not refactor all their front end. And the third thing is, man, like I love React, right? I reckon it's really cool. I felt that way about Backbone like 3 or 4 years ago. So what do you do? Do you just do this every 3 or 4 years? Skate is different for a couple of reasons. The first is React, Angular, Backbone, they're not browser standards. Custom elements are a browser standard and will be with us always for a very long time to come. We have a thin polyfill around that. But interestingly, the only people who interact with that polyfill are the Skate author and the component author. The person consuming the component They're just writing an HTML string like, X dialogue or something into their page. They don't know that Skate exists. In fact, we could rewrite that X dialogue component using native web components completely under the hood. We could ditch Skate, and it hasn't changed for them. So they're still just using. Sorry,
I'm kidding.
Well, look. Okay, maybe not the current implementation we have. Theoretically,
I don't want you to.
Just don't.
Right. Okay. Sorry. Let me correct. We could do that. Trey would just kill me if we did that. The point I'm trying to make is that, going to like a browser standard is a completely different thing than adopting some new third-party library.
No, you're dead on that, and I think that's I think that's the current sort of joy of web components. Even though it may still be early days. We have polyfills, we have things that we know are going to probably change. But like you said, you make a very valid point. Is that under the hood of that component for an end consumer, someone who may write declarative code, because they're still teaching, hey, everyone starts somewhere, and these days it's a lot of HTML and JavaScript and those sorts of things. And dropping in a tag is a very nice little simple thing that we can do. And under the hood, they're not going to care. Component authors are going to use what they know, what they feel good with, and I think that's okay, right? We can all have an opinion about it and still all get along because you're right. It is a standard. They're all built on top of standards, and that they do stick around. There's a lot of things that don't get ripped out over time, though I'm sure eventually that may change and that'll keep us all very well employed. But at some point,
like, the things that make change really hard and make it hard to rip stuff out is what's the API surface, If it's really broad and really open, really hard to change. If it's quite narrow and just exposes only the things that you've decided up front, hey, these are things people can actually change and work with, well, then that's easier. It's not for free, but it's easier.
Yeah, I think, too, that's one thing that scared people is that, over the past few months, the web components in general hasn't been too popular in a lot of the tech discussions, right? Because there's a lot of change and a lot of flux and no decision making that's happening at a quick level, and so people are getting frustrated. And I think it's happening faster than people think. And if you look at the status on Edge, if you look at the status on Chrome, if you look at the status on Firefox. Can't look at the status on Safari, but they have agreed in these meetings. You could see that this is going to start getting adopted. What I do fear with this is, okay, we have these bugs in there. They've said it that, okay, we are definitely going to implement this stuff. How long is it going to take to implement? So I think people are fearful of that, but I think what they don't understand is it's going to be done. And browsers are not like they used to be, where a release comes out every 2 years or a year. It comes out every 3 months or less.
Well, and a lot of people don't realize that the conversation around custom elements and web components in general have been, 4+ years in sort of mailing lists and message boards. Like, it's
a lot of disagreement.
And a lot of disagreement. There has been a significant amount of churn in it. Obviously, there were contentious bits that we all sort of worked around, and a lot of that has been resolved. Like, I think that there is nothing particularly wrong with sort of taking a look at this landscape and make that call. And as a web developer now, you really do have to do that. You can't. Staying static on the web now, in terms of your skill sets, is a very dangerous play, because, as you guys said, frameworks flip over. It seems like every 3 or 4 years at this point. Of what's the new hotness, and let's all ditch all this other code for this new thing.
You should feel bad for using the old code. That's an important part of being a developer, is shunning other people for not using the new thing that you're using.
It's a very important part of being a front-end developer, actually.
Yeah.
I used Fortran 95 the other day. Does that
thing too?
I do think with the spec in general, though, I think it has been kind of to their demise, all that churn. I know it needs to happen, and it's necessary, but I do think with like a lot of new technologies like React emerging, people are really not confident in the spec because it's been changing. They don't know what's really going on with it. You know, browser vendors still have to implement it, and then there's these other tools that they can use in order to get something similar done.
But those other tools have also pushed that conversation forward too, and I think that's jQuery is like is always my gold standard example. Why did we get query selector? Because jQuery basically showed that was a really good thing to have, and I think things like React and everything else and Ember and everything have shown that, hey, yeah, maybe we do want more out of the web, and things like the extensible manifesto sort of popped up, and then, hey, let's get some lower level interfaces that we can build, high level nice things for people who are developers, but maybe maybe they're hobbyists, or maybe they're a small company, they don't have that 10-year vet who sat on the mailing list and lurked there for a year going, please ship this. But yeah, I mean, I think that's important though for the web, and I think that's why the web has sort of started to expand, and why why do we have Edge? We kind of realistically we won. We pushed that conversation forward, and then all of a sudden change happened. So if anything comes out of having new frameworks with speed and all the lovely APIs we're going to eventually get, I'll wait a little while longer. If they just keep turning out releases, I'm fine with that.
Even like the most a very, very recent example is you look at the early when Angular first came out to what Angular 2 is, and just that all these frameworks now are component frameworks, almost first and foremost. They are about building component. React is all about building components. Your quote-unquote view in React is a component built up of other components, and that's the way that Angular 2.0 is working. So all of these things are kind of lining up closer and closer with what the web is hopefully eventually going to give us. Everything is moving in this direction, and then hopefully at some point it's well, look, we don't even need that. Maybe in the future all we will need is something like a Skate, where it is just an abstraction away from the from a dense API or something like that, and we won't need some of these other things. Well, I mean, that's the dream, but then what will a lot of people do?
But then what will I read every week, Danny, on the blogs about the new thing that came out that I'm really ashamed of not using? I need things to read.
You can always read about ES8, and all that new stuff.
There'll be something bad happening. That actually did bring up a point. It actually did bring up a question I wanted to ask. So, because all of these frameworks are moving more and more towards component frameworks, could you theoretically build an app just with Skate? The examples we've been talking about so far have been, in building things for other applications. Could you build an entire application reasonably just with Skate?
The view layer, yes. I think that a lot of hurdles that people might encounter when doing that is the fact that it has less of an opinion about the templating aspect of it, and they kind of want that decision made for them, and they just want to build an app, right? So that might be a blocker there for them. I don't know, but yeah, you can. I mean, there is a default behavior where it will just basically just set in your HTML for your template, and you take the DOM, and a lot of functional people hate that, but that's a safe default to have, I think. Because there's a lot more opinions that come in when you start wanting to do DOM diffing and all this other stuff. So, but yeah, it depends on what you want to do. Of course, you can. You can build an app just with jQuery.
Is there anywhere in the code that you guys do use template tags, though?
Sorry.
I'm sorry. Is there any place in the code that you guys do use template tags, though?
No.
Okay.
Because you haven't polyfilled them.
Yes, true. It is a small polyfill, but yes.
But it is a polyfill. I if you can't tell, I'm a big fan of Skate, largely for some of those reasons. Polyfills make me queasy. I understand that they need to be there, especially because I like Polymer a lot. I think there are a lot of really good things about it, but most of it is a polyfill at this point.
Without having an opinion on the templating layer, I'm not really sure how we use the template tag. Because you can just use the template tag as it is and get the content from it and set it to the content of your custom element with a line of code. But there's no place where we would really have to make use of that, unless we have an opinion.
So I'm gonna go a different direction because directions are good. You guys are joining the jQuery Foundation as a project incubator. What's that all about? Like, what does that give the project? New roadmaps, more things.
Justin, are you telling me you don't want to argue about Shadow DOM and templates anymore?
To me, it's not an argument. Like to me, it's just okay. Well, everyone's got an opinion, and I'm fine with that. Like I make no mistake. Like, my opinion is, I'm one person with it doesn't matter. Like, I think that's the kicker, is that, like, you're entitled to your opinion as a developer, but you still have to work with your team, and you still have to implement something to ship. And whether you're using Shadow DOM or templates or whatever, like, at the end of the day, just ship the thing. Like, come up with a plan, use the tools you have, and do good work. That's my general thing, and my opinion beyond that does not mean much. But jQuery Foundation!
It is only an hour podcast after all, Danny.
I'll try to keep it short. So it's a small project, and I'm terrible at marketing. And it's also my really first successful foray into open source. I really should say there's more than just me contributing to it.
No, well, you drive it.
Yeah, well, I drive it, yeah. So doing things other than coding, testing, and to some extent documentation, they're all new to me. And making them, well, not new to me, but like making them accessible to a really, really broad audience and getting it out there and believing in it. Like, I really believe if I can write it, somebody else can write it. But, maybe that's not true, I don't know. So being part of the incubator, I hope it'll help build a contributor base and user base, facilitate things like documentation. I don't know. I mean, like, it's going to be a good learning experience for me and the jQuery Foundation itself, because we're kind of helping work through some stumbling blocks, and it's all new to them too. So it'll be really good for that.
I think it's great. I would not sell yourself short. There are lots of people who can write code, but there are very few people who can take something, make it open source, and continue to do that thing. And as someone who uses a lot of open source and tries to contribute as much as he can, I say thank you for those people who won't say thank you, because it is a very hard thing to do. And please do not sell yourself short on that. It is tough.
Yes, thank you, definitely.
Thank you.
So as far as like some of the code too, this isn't my question, but I do want to know the answer to this too. Event listener syntax is interesting. I think Danny wrote this. I think.
Oh, I did. Yes, I did.
So how do you guys decide how to handle events inside of this?
So I guess that's probably one of the more opinionated parts about Skate, since it does have its particular syntax for event delegation. But it's very much based on the backbone model of doing that. Everything is, so if you don't have a selector, everything is just attached directly to the host element. If you do have a selector, things are just delegated to the host element. So everything's still bound to it. It's still the current target, but things just bubble up to it.
No, having a built-in way to do event delegation is really nice, and it also makes it much easier to get people to do it rather than having to manually check, check your event target and things like that. Which, I mean, a thing that jQuery, mentioned you guys in jQuery in the same sentence a lot, but one of the things that jQuery does really well is their event delegation syntax. So having something like that in Skate is, I think, pretty awesome.
And it uses the same naming conventions for like eDoc, get delegate, or delegate target and current target and things, which is kind of nice for people transitioning to that. But the event system is it's one of those things that like you're going to have to do anyway. So it's part of that boilerplate thing. That, it's just giving you a common pattern, or solving the common problems, building more components without having too much of an opinion, I guess.
Yeah. I mean, I haven't figured out what I'm more leaning towards yet, but I think for DOM right now I've just been using custom events. Unless if it's IE9, I'll use a small polyfill. It's just like 20 lines or something. But whenever it's JavaScript, I try to use an emitter and some delegator. if it's just JavaScript. But if it's DOM, I try to use the custom events. Do
So
you guys find that at all?
A little polyfill for that. So there's a skate.emit function that will use custom event if it's available, but it will bubble things up for you.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah.
That's pretty cool.
I mean, there are these small little tiny things that they're very common problems, and solving some of those are just kind of nice, so people don't have to find something else. It's about striking that balance.
Yeah, and if anybody's curious about any of the stuff that we are talking about, there is pretty extensive documentation on the Skate.js GitHub page in their README right now. So they talk about the public-facing API, the create method we've talked about, just talked about the emit method. So that documentation is already pretty thorough. So I encourage giving it a look through.
Well,
so we got like a couple more minutes.
We're about to kick out of our room.
Okay.
Sweet.
Well, so do you guys just want to try to go ahead and wrap up then? Like I said, get like two more minutes, wrap everything up, and hopefully don't make your coworkers mad at you.
That's cool. Yeah. Sure.
Yeah, there's only 2 more questions left, so we can probably skip the browser support one because you can find that out on the site. But okay, do you want to quickly mention the browser support then? Just quickly, because I think the mobile is the only question I have.
We don't have we're not running mobile browsers on Sauce Labs yet, but I think. I'm fairly confident in this that Opera Mini isn't the only non-supported mobile browser. It should work on all the other browsers. As far as desktop browsers, IE9 and up.
IE9 is a big one for
corporate and government for sure. And government, at least in the United States. So one of the questions too I had is, and this is something that I've encountered with a lot of different projects that are built with web components. Typically, I'll see they'll have like Polymer stuff, but I don't see a lot of elements in the wild that are like vanilla elements or things out there. Have you seen anybody use even internally at Atlassian? What are people using Skate.js for? For applications, for element creation, or what are they using it for?
Mostly reusable components, so what the web component spec is trying to solve. Not using it for big layouts and apps yet. We're actually spiking that in our project right now on Howie to be able to use it for that. But it's mostly just smaller reusable components, some compound components, so using having descendants that are web components and having interaction between them.
Yeah, so look, the predominant use case is component library style things, right? Controls, drop downs, little things with behavior. We do use it for, or what Trey said, we're using it for kind of broader page layouts. I think one of the questions before was, could you use Skate to just completely build like an application? And yeah, sure you could. And Trey said, I guess I would even take Skate or web components a little bit further, which is that, I went to do MVC recently, and there were literally 50 different frameworks, like, showing a kind of to-do MVC. And they're all doing various different permutations of, like, views, which are rendering stuff to the DOM, view models, which is your representation of the data on the page, models, which are, your back-end kind of entities, and then, some layer across the top, which is kind of handling routing and communication between views and models, and communication between hierarchies of, views or hierarchies of models. When you're starting from nothing, it makes sense to keep continually reinventing that and finding different and better ways to do it, right? And that's what Backbone and Ember and Angular and React are all doing. What custom elements brings is a way for expressing your view models in the DOM as custom elements. And eventually Shadow DOM, and whether it's slots or content selectors, will give you a pretty good way of doing templating, which handles the view models. So I think, looking to the future, it's going to be more of a future of, new frameworks kind of assuming that custom elements exist, and they have a pretty good, way of handling like the view and the view model kind of part of things, and do a lot of things nicely, right? Like hierarchies of like view models is something that works really well with bubbling DOM events or custom events if your view models are basically DOM in the page. And that, the like frameworks of the future will be concerned more with the communication between sort of hierarchies of those things, or alternatively, routing and those kind of top-level concerns too.
Yeah, I've always found routing to be one of those contentious pieces with components. I don't know if I like it or I hate
it. Yeah, I don't know. Yeah, I wouldn't say point to anyone and gone, man, that is like the best way of doing routing ever, and everyone should follow that. Like, there's the total need for it, but I just,
It's hard. It's really hard.
Yeah, because like when you try and compare it to something like UI router, like Angular or the React router, you're like, no, there's no comparison. It's a totally different creature. But anyway, I mean, as far as Skate goes, I think this has been really, really great. I plan on actually using this on a few things, I think. So I appreciate all the work you guys have done with the open source community. Myself, if people want to contribute and help out, how can they do that? How can they find you to talk to you about this stuff? What's your Twitter handles? All that good stuff.
Yep. So in the README, it gives you a link to the hip chat room that you can use to mention contributors. I try and lurk in there as much as possible, but due to time zones, that's kind of hard. There's a contributing Markdown file that you can read that it'll prompt you to when you're submitting an issue or whatever, or pull requests. You can read to give back. How do you want me to deliver my Twitter handle? Got a whiteboard behind us.
How complicated is it?
Oh, it's just it's Trey Shugart, but without the Y.
Perfect.
And mine's at Creenaune, and I'm assuming everyone knows how to spell my name. No, it's at JCREENAUNE.
And we'll put all this stuff in the show notes as well. So
yes, we will.
I really want my Twitter handle to be a regex expression. I don't know why they don't allow me to do this. I try every so often, and it just doesn't work. It's a dream. I have this dream.
I was surprised. I got my Twitter handle to be a or not the handle itself, but it let me do the name as an ES6 string template, which I was surprised it let me do.
Watch, that'll be like taken away tomorrow.
I'm sorry. That was never mind. I'm just.
Well, thank you guys. Yes.
Thank you guys.
Really appreciate it.